Welcome back to Tinygrams Games, and I'm here with another Star Wars Destiny video. And today I want to talk about battlefields. I feel like battlefields are both the hardest part of the game to play and the most underappreciated aspect of the game combined together. And as such, it's time we take a closer look at them. So the first thing to remember when we're looking at battlefields is there are several ways to decide which battlefield you're going to put into your deck. The first question is, do you want a deck where you are building around the battlefield? So for example, something like the Emperor's Throne Room, which says, claim the battlefield, turn one of your dice to a side showing a special ability, then you may resolve that die. If you're going to put this in your deck, you should be building around this. You need to have tons of awesome specials you want to be triggering, or at least one insane one that you can be guaranteed you'll always have out, say on a character die. The reason this is so important is because of the double-edged nature of battlefields, and this is what makes them so interesting, so difficult to play, and so amazingly designed and important in the game. Because if you include a battlefield that has a really strong ability like resolving a special, not only are you turning this on for yourself, but you're turning it on for your opponent, then you're putting all kinds of pressure on yourself to potentially have to claim that battlefield before you're ready to. Maybe you roll out a whole bunch of dice and your opponent does the same, but it's clear they have an awesome special they can resolve at any point to get like 5 damage, and you just can't let that happen, and you sometimes feel like you get boxed into the situation where you need to take it. So one of the most fundamental aspects of deck building is figuring out how you're going to juggle this. Are you going for the explosive battlefield that you have to take? That can be dangerous. Or are you going to go for something kind of decent, right? Like, here's a good example, the Imperial Armory. Claim. Play an upgrade from your hand, decreasing its cost by 1. Everyone's got upgrades. Everyone loves decreasing by 1. So it's going to help you. It's going to help your opponent. But it's not going to be a total blowout when it happens. It's going to be a minor help. And so you really have to figure out what you're going to do there. The second thing is to remember, if you build your deck around a battlefield, what are you going to do if your opponent chooses their battlefield? Maybe they built their entire deck around their battlefield. And so it's this give and take of designing your deck around a battlefield. If you do, how imperative is it? How double-edged is that battlefield? It makes for some really intriguing deck building decisions. Okay, so let's move away from that. Building one's deck becomes really critical, and we'll look at each of these battlefields in detail in a moment. But the next step is knowing when to take the battlefield and knowing which battlefield to even start with. Because the way the game starts is you're both going to roll your dice. Whoever has the most numbers showing will get to decide what battlefield it is for the whole game, thus deleting the other one from the whole game. This is really critical because whoever battlefield is not chosen, that person gets 2 shields. So if you take a really benign battlefield like Imperial Armory or Echo Base, and you feel very comfortable saying, okay, this wasn't really that imperative to me anyway, so I'm fine picking your battlefield and giving myself 2 shields. But it becomes really important to notice things like if your opponent has the Emperor's Throne Room out, they built their deck around that. They want to use that. So do not let them choose that, and don't choose it for them unless you have to. Another interesting situation is the Salvage Yard. Salvage Yard can be good for both of you, but it's pretty specific. Like if someone wants to loop something, this can be a really dangerous battlefield to give them. So right from the start, you're having to make a really difficult decision. Luckily, you get to look at their characters, and so you can get quite a bit of information from them, just from their characters, about how their deck might be built. But oftentimes, this first moment of the game can make or break a game. If you choose the wrong battlefield, it can set you way, way, way back, and that can be terrifying. So the next problem that we face is at the end of each turn, the obvious play is to, I resolve all my dice, you resolve all your dice, whoever resolves all their dice first takes the battlefield and moves on. and that's perfectly fine when you have benign battlefields. However, as we've talked about already, with these explosive battlefields, you have this option of depriving your opponent something great or doing something nasty to your opponent early in the turn. One of my favorite battlefields is the Frozen Waste, and it says claim, remove a character die. Now, if you're playing a more control-based deck, once you do whatever it is you want to do on your turn, let's say it's just resolve 2 of your dice, you may not have any dice after that that are that imperative. And so quite often I'll find myself very early in a turn just claiming this. Oh, my opponent had a really good roll, and they don't have that many dice left. They resolved 1 character, they're on to the next one, they rolled 2 dice, one's 3 damage, one's a blank. You know what? I have 4 dice showing. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and take the Frozen Waste and remove that 3 damage die. That can be a really powerful tool. It can be really shocking to your opponent. So you need to be aware that sometimes taking these battlefields early can be great. Now, the flip side though, let's say you have your Poe Dameron and he's got both of his dice showing, and your opponent has a Mind Probe. And you know that if you let your opponent, they might take this Emperor's Throne Room and do 5 damage to you. And let's say you have a Falcon in hand and you're going to do 4 damage. And so there's this tension of who's going to take this first to resolve their special. If you take it early, once you take a battlefield, it's so dangerous because you have to pass all the rest of your actions for the turn. And so you're essentially doing this. Oh boy. All right. I'm going to take the battlefield. Be gentle. And if your opponent has a lot of dice manipulation, especially if they're blue, this is so dangerous. I've had people sort of whiz through their turns and then grab the battlefield when I have 4 dice on the table. It's like 2 blank stormtroopers, a Vader, pretty benign die, and something else. I'm like, okay, I have 4 cards in my hand and a resource. So I have used the Force where I can just spin one to wherever I want. I have a couple discards, and I end up turning this complete board of garbage into like 6 damage and killing a character. And so it's really an interesting, difficult moment to figure out when do you take the battlefield, when do you pass. Remember, you can always just pass. At any moment you can say, pass, no thanks, go ahead and take an action. If your opponent passes, the turn goes away. But most likely if you're in a position where you're passing, you don't mind that much if the turn ends because you're worried they're going to do all kinds of stuff to you. So this is what makes battlefields so critical and so difficult to use. Let's go ahead and take a look at each of these in turn that have been spoiled so far. We've got 7 of the 10 spoiled, and kind of talk about what kind of decks they go in and how they might be used. So let's start with the Salvage Yard. This comes in the Rey starter deck, and it says, choose a support or upgrade in your discard pile and place it on top of your deck. Now this is one of these battlegrounds or battlefields that is generally thought of as kind of benign, but there's some really interesting things you can do with it. Because when you play upgrades on top of other upgrades, you only have to pay the difference in cost. You can do some really interesting tricks. Like, for instance, you could loop a comlink every single turn, just overwriting it with something else, bringing in the comlink, overwriting that, and continually getting this comlink back on top of your deck and getting a nice big reroll. That's pretty strong. Probably my favorite use is the Holdout Blaster. The Holdout Blaster, when combined with Rey, is really strong. It has Ambush, so when you play it on Rey, it triggers Rey's ability to get an extra action, and then you get an extra action because of Ambush. So you can do things like play the Holdout Blaster on Rey, then roll any other character, resolve its dice, and then you're in business. And then what do? You overwrite the Holdout Blaster, perhaps with another Holdout Blaster, and do it again. It goes in your discard pile. Then you claim the battlefield. Boop. Holdout Blaster goes on top of your deck. You get it, and you just get to do this neat trick every single turn. That can be really, really powerful. It can also be powerful with cards like Poe. Poe Dameron says when you resolve his special, you discard something from your hand, and you get to resolve whatever side of that die you want. So if you're constantly discarding big, useful cards that you like to get back, Salvage Yard can be really good with that. It can really be good with any strategy that is involving a particular upgrade that you're worried about. I used to play this with whenever I played a Sith Holocron deck, just because on the off chance something happened to my Sith Holocron, being able to get it back because it's so strong. But basically, it's one of these battlefields that aren't too worrisome, but in certain archetypes you might not want to let your opponent have it, but usually it's going to be okay. Perhaps my favorite battlefield is the Frozen Waste. It says claim, remove a character die. I love this battlefield in one of two types of decks. In a control deck, I love the battlefield because if my goal is to go long and either set up a situation where in the late game I'm playing giant cards like AT-STs and blowing people out, or if I'm going for more of a mill strategy, either way I need my characters to live late into the game. And if I'm going to do that, being able to pull off a character die can be incredibly useful and painful for my opponent. And I usually try to do it at shocking moments where it'll be mid-turn, it looks like I've got a couple more actions to do, so instead of resolving the die they probably should have resolved, they're like, I'm going to get a resource because I got this other trick I want to do, and then you're just like, boom, I'll take that amazing die. And they go, oh, jeez, I did not expect you to end the turn right there. Another way it can be used, and this is almost a complete flip side, is if you're playing a really aggressive deck that's going to burn through its actions super fast, this is an incredible way to end a turn, right? So if you're playing Django, your opponent rolls their die, you say, okay, I'll respond to that by activating Django. My turn, I'll resolve the dice I want to resolve. Maybe one more turn, and then, boom, snap up the Frozen Waste, remove their best die. And yes, you're vulnerable. We talked about this, right? If you take it too early, you're vulnerable. But you're a lot less vulnerable when your battlefield says, take their best die away. So that can be incredibly powerful. And look carefully, it says remove a character die. It doesn't say remove any die. So I've had a couple people get blown out by that. They go to remove, like a force choke or something. It can only remove character dice. But it is an incredibly useful battlefield. It's versatile. It doesn't have that really bad double-edged feeling to it because if you're including it, you're probably the person who's going to be using it much, much more. And it's not as hard to play around as some of the other ones. You just resolve your character dice first. I'd say the scariest battlefield, and I'd go so far as to say the scariest battlefield by far that we've seen spoiled, is Emperor's Throne Room. This thing is terrifying. Claim. Turn one of your dice to a side showing a special, then you may resolve that die. Now, let's say you're running double Poe Dameron. This guy is nuts. So you roll your Poe, it's a special and a blank. Okay, I'll resolve my special and discard the Millennium Falcon and do 4 damage to your face. Oh, by the way, I'm running him with whatever, some character. I'll go ahead and claim the battlefield, and I'll also do one with the Force and do 3 to your face, or whatever giant upgrade you have. He's really powerful with lots of expensive upgrades, and this becomes this insane tool that you can use to power Poe. Now, this one more than any has a dire double-edged feeling to it. Because let's say you're playing against a villain blue deck, they very well may have Mind Probe in their deck. And once a Mind Probe die hits the field, you're going, oh no, Poe, what am I supposed to do? How early do I have to take this? I once had a game where I felt really pressured to take this battlefield as my third action. First action, activate Poe. Second action, do his special. Third action, I don't have a lot of actions left. My opponent doesn't either at this point. No good dice. So I say, screw it. I'm going to take the battlefield, kill one of his guys. It looks amazing. But he takes like 7 actions after that. Manipulates all his dice and just blows me out of the building. He kills. I think he even killed Poe right after that. Whereas if I had stayed in the turn, I had mitigation. I had things I could do. But I just felt a lot of pressure. Like either I give him 5 damage from Mind Probe, or say 4 or 3 maybe, if I'm able to wait long enough and stall him out long enough. It's just a terrifying double-edged feeling. So when you're playing against a blue deck for the villains, you need to be careful choosing Throne Room. I know you built your deck around it, but still, it's going to be scary. Another battlefield that I find incredibly interesting is Echo Base. It's a pretty benign battlefield. Claim, give a character 1 shield. that's okay, right? Like if you're running a Vader deck or an elite Luke deck or an elite Han deck, some characters that you are absolutely building around, getting a shield every turn can be really good. There's no real guarantee you're going to be claiming the battlefield if you're not building a fast action deck or something like that, but it's there. It can help that guy stick around. But one character that it does synergize really well with is Qui-Gon. Since his whole ability is based around shields, he says before this character gains one or more shields, you get to remove one of them and deal damage to ping it to somebody. So this could be really interesting if you use this as one more way of basically saying do a damage to any character. Now the problem is it's double-edged again, right? Okay, so you're pinging one singular damage with this Echo base, but at the same time, half the time they're probably preserving one single damage with this base. So it ends up being this battlefield that is interesting. I kind of like it. I think people will use it with Qui-Gon. I think I'm more likely to use it in a deck where I have a character I just have to keep alive. The deck is built around that character. I think I'll be very interested in keeping a particular character alive. A battlefield that I haven't seen many people use, and I myself have not used at all yet, is the separatist base, which says claim each opponent chooses and deals one unblockable damage to one of their characters. This is one of these battlefields that it's a damage, but okay. Like doing a damage that's unblockable to anyone they want is not really that great. You look at that and go, okay, I mean, that's fine. I think this is going to be more useful in a situation where, like, if you have a whole bunch of characters, maybe you can exploit this a little more. Like if you're running 2 stormtroopers or 4 stormtroopers even, having something like this where if your opponent is claiming it, you don't mind that much, you're just spraying that damage around, it could be useful. And it very well may be useful in some sort of deck that is trying to blow your opponent out really fast before they can even get set up and is running through its actions really quick. That's a situation where I could see this being a little bit more useful, but to me it feels fairly benign. Another battlefield that I haven't used much yet, but it looks kind of interesting, is the Rebel War Room. It says claim, resolve one of your dice. If it has a resource cost, you do not have to pay it. And a good example of where this can be useful is somebody like Kylo Ren. When I look at Kylo Ren's die, I'm generally a bit unimpressed by it. It's got 3 damage sides, which sounds amazing, except for the fact that one only does 1, and one costs a resource. And if you're playing a blue deck, you're generally spending a lot on upgrades. Now, if you get your holocron right away, oh, then you're living in magical Christmas land, and you don't have to spend any money for upgrades. But when I play blue, I play upgrades. I play lots of damage mitigation. I don't have a lot of money just sitting around every turn to be able to resolve these dice. And so I often get in spots where dice that cost money I'm a little bit less happy about. And so for it to have someone like Kylo Ren and to be able to have this ability where you can just slam 2 damage down just by taking the battlefield can be really good. And I see this being quite good if you're combining a whole bunch of these effects together, right? Like stormtroopers have a side like this. A number of the weapons that would go on stormtroopers have sides where you need to spend a resource. So I think this can be a powerful battlefield, and I think we're going to see quite a few people using it as we move on and we see more and more cards with powerful sides that cost a resource. The last battlefield that's been spoiled is Imperial Armory. And this says claim, play an upgrade from your hand, decreasing its cost by 1. This is one of these battlefields that I pretty much never choose because I'm trying to build a deck with some sort of goal in mind. And the goal is generally not just dump out cheap upgrades. I'm already looking to do that. However, in a deck, I could especially see this if you're running something like 4 stormtroopers and tons of redeploy weapons. Redeploy weapons are a little bit overcosted. Like this is a great example. To me, I do not like this rifle. But the fact that it has redeploy means if I play it in a deck with, say, 4 stormtroopers or some other deck where I'm intending that people are going to be dying, having redeploy is really useful. And so if I'm going to be playing slightly overcosted upgrades, and my goal is to just litter the board with upgrades on tons of characters, then I could see something like Imperial Armory being really useful. At the end of the turn, say you play 1 upgrade for 2 on a Stormtrooper. You roll another Stormtrooper. You get a resource. Goes into the pool. At the end of your turn, go ahead and claim the battlefield. And now for 1, you're able to play something like the Holdout Blaster Rifle, or the F-1 Rifle, or the other rifles, or whatever other upgrades come out. And I think that can be pretty useful. But generally speaking, this is not a battlefield where I'm worried when I see it. I will often give this to my opponent if I win the roll to take the 2 shields, unless my battlefield is contributing greatly to my own deck. So those are the 7 battlefields that have been spoiled so far. Again, battlefields are something you really need to start engaging with and thinking about carefully. And there's so many levels to these battlefields. It's thinking about them during the deck building process. It's thinking about it at the start of the game, really evaluating the characters out there and the battlefield showing which one should you go with. And then finally, every single turn, right from about the first roll, you need to be thinking, how is this battlefield going to fit into this turn? What am I looking at as a time frame for taking this battlefield? Is there something I need to use this battlefield for? Is there something I fear from my opponent that they're going to be able to do with this battlefield? So the bottom line is battlefields are very critical to the game. They're something that I think most people haven't given a lot of attention to. And hopefully you will get the chance to do that now. And I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time on Tiny Grimes Games.